Dreaming. It's something that we all do every night when we lay our head to our pillow and drift off to sleep. Some of our dreams can be very complex, some can be truly bizarre and confusing, some can be very enjoyable and utterly convincing. Sometimes whilst dreaming it is hard to distinguish between the dream and reality. And then there's nightmares, dreams that are very unsettling and can cause a lot of stress. Sometimes they can be truly terrifying, scary enough to actually wake you up. But we all know this, we all know what dreams are. What we don't know is why we dream. Dreams still remain a mystery. Take ancient Egyptians for example. They believed a dream took place in between the living world and the dead, and between these worlds it was possible to converse with the gods. Take the ancient Egyptian Thutmose IV, who was the 8th pharaoh of the 18th dynasty of Egypt, and apparently before he was pharaoh he had fallen asleep under the head of the Great Sphinx of Giza, which was at this point in time completely buried up to the neck in sand. Whilst he was asleep, he was apparently visited in a dream by the Sphinx, who told him if he was to clear away the sand that covered the statue and restore it, then one day he would be pharaoh. And so he did, and of course he did become pharaoh, even though he was not next in line. Even the Greeks and the Romans thought that dreaming was a way to contact the gods, and they believed dreams could be a way of predicting the future, and many civilizations even built sleep shrines which they could go to and sleep in hopes of receiving messages from the gods, sometimes after a small sacrifice. There was even oracles who would listen to you as you told them your dreams, and then they would search for a meaning to your dream whilst falling asleep themselves and looking for the answer in their dream. Obviously since then we've come a very long way. Many now believe that dreams are just a way for the brain to decide where certain memories should be stored away in different parts of the brain. For example, there are many memories that you have that are very easy to access, but there are still some memories that you may have had from 30 years ago that have never resurfaced. But they're still there, they are hidden, they are locked away in your brain, and all it may take is something as little as a certain smell to unlock it and bring it forward and make it known to you once again. For example, have you ever had a dream in the middle of the night that you have awoken from and thought, that was amazing, what a great dream that was, and then half an hour later, you can't remember that dream, the memory has simply vanished, and as hard as you try, you just can't seem to remember it. But then there are some dreams that stay with you all your life, a dream that was so profound, it remains at the forefront of your memories. Some people have claimed that they have actually predicted the future and even seen dead relatives who have visited them, often with a warning or a message that ultimately proves to be more than just a dream in the waking world. Today I want to tell you some bizarre stories that are all said to be true and all started with a dream and ended with tragedy or prevented tragedy. Let me start with Abraham Lincoln. Now, it would seem that Abraham Lincoln had some kind of strange connection to the paranormal, and if you remember back to my doppelganger episode, I believe Abraham Lincoln actually saw a gaunt-looking version of himself in the mirror, and at the time Abraham Lincoln apparently took this as a bad omen, as did his wife. But it would seem that he did have other strange, bizarre experiences, but this time in the dream world. Now, apparently this dream that Lincoln had was documented by Ward Hill Layman, Lincoln's friend and bodyguard. According to Lincoln's friend, the president had been up all night awaiting dispatch notes from the front. When he finally got to bed, he quickly fell asleep and went right into a very vivid, disturbing dream. In the dream, he awoke to hear disembodied sobs coming from somewhere in the White House. As the president searched the rooms, he could hear the crying, but still there was nobody around. But he was determined to find the source of the crying, and so he ventured all the way to the East Room. As he entered, he was met with a sight that horrified him. Lying there in the middle of the room on a raised platform was a corpse, wrapped in funeral garments. Around the body were many mourners crying and sobbing. When Lincoln approached a soldier at the door and asked what was going on, the soldier replied that the president had been assassinated, and with that he woke up. Days later, Lincoln was indeed assassinated whilst at the theatre, and afterwards his body was kept in the far East Room of the White House. My next story is another example of dreams predicting the future, but unfortunately once again, the future seen in this dream was not prevented. This tragic story takes place on the 21st of October back in 1966. A spoil tip that had been accumulating since 1958 from mining waste that stood 111 feet high collapsed. The waste pile that had been built on the mountain slope was above the Welsh village of Aberfan, and unfortunately it had been heavily saturated with rainwater. The 140,000 cubic yards of water-saturated rock slid down the mountain in waves that reached 30 foot in height and travelled between 11 and 21 miles per hour, and when it reached the bottom of the mountain, it obliterated a primary school and a row of houses, killing 116 children and 28 adults. The sound of the avalanche was later described as something very similar to a low-flying jet or very loud thunder. As the avalanche hit the school and a row of houses, it demolished and engulfed everything and filled the classrooms with a thick mud, sludge and rubble combination, which tragically suffocated most of the children inside or simply crushed them to death. 209 students were at school that day and 109 of them sadly lost their lives, along with 5 teachers. This all happened at 9:15 a.m. Apparently the children had just sat down for register. And when you hear this, you can't help but think, what if the tragedy had happened only half an hour earlier, when the children were still at home getting ready for school? A lot of lives could have been saved. And then there is also the very sad fact that at 12 o'clock that day, school would have finished for half term. And you can't help but think, if only the avalanche would have happened after 12, maybe a lot of lives could have been spared. The damage was immense, and all the locals started to help dig their way through the rubble to help find any survivors. Eventually, the men from the mines made their way down the mountain and helped instruct where to dig to avoid another collapse. When they eventually dug their way into the classrooms, it was discovered that some of the staff had died trying to protect the children, including a Nancy Williams, who I believe was a dinner lady, who succeeded in shielding 5 children from the avalanche, and they all survived. But unfortunately, Nancy was killed. Also, the headmaster was found. It would seem that he tried to shield some children with a chalkboard, but ultimately he failed. It was just too much rubble falling on top of him, and he was found in his classroom along with 34 other pupils, all dead. A chapel was used as a makeshift mortuary where most of the dead were taken. Most died of suffocation, head injuries, or being crushed. Apparently the chapel was so full, parents were only allowed in one at a time to identify the dead. Apparently on the 19th of October, 2 days before the disaster happened, a 10-year-old girl named Errol May had woken from a terrible nightmare. She told her mother that she had dreamt that she went to school only to find it was gone because something black was now covering it. Apparently later she also told her mother that she was not afraid to die, as she would soon be with Peter and June, who were 2 school friends who had died young. But that was not all. There was also other people who were writing letters saying that they had also predicted the disaster in their dreams. One lady wrote in describing her vision of children trying in vain to escape a room which was filling up with more children as they screamed in vain trying to get out. Another lady had a terrifying dream where she had a vision of a miner, then a school at the bottom of a valley, and then a child stood at the bottom of a mountain looking petrified as he looked up to the mountain to see a black mass of coal rushing towards him. And another lady was also said to have dreamt about a group of black horses running down a mountainside dragging hearses. It would seem that many people around the town of Aberfan had had these strange visions and dreams before the accident actually happened. Unfortunately, none of these dream visions made it obvious what was going to happen, and the connection was only made afterwards. Many of these visions were confirmed by either friends or family who were told about it the day before the disaster happened. The next story is actually a story of my own which describes a dream that my sister had which she believes predicted the future. My sister told me that once she had a recurring dream every night for about a week in 1989. In her dream she was walking down the street as a young boy with blonde hair rode past her at quite some speed on his bike. The child was going so fast he could not stop and he flew off the curb and right into the road and was killed by a red car crashing into him. Every night she had this dream over and over again, and it was safe to say it was freaking her out. One day my mother asked her to nip out to the shop, and so she got her coat on and left the house. As she started walking down the street, she felt something very familiar, something like deja vu, and all of a sudden a blonde-haired child sped past her on his bike heading towards the curb. Without thinking, she darted after the boy and grabbed him, pulling him back off the bike and onto the ground away from the road, just as a red car went speeding past. And guess what? That little boy was me. Now, my sister swears that this is a true story. I myself have no memory of this happening, but I do love the story and I have no reason to believe that my sister would make up such a thing. And I also love the idea that she was warned, or that she predicted what could have happened to me if she didn't act fast enough and pull me from that bike. So though we've covered a couple of examples of how dreams can predict the future, but just for now, I want to put predictions at one side and just talk about how strange a dream can be and even helpful. The Beatles song Yesterday was actually thought up by Paul McCartney in a dream that he had. And when he awoke, he quickly went over to his piano and worked out the keys and played the melodies, and the rest is history. Now that song has gone on to be covered by so many different artists, and it is one of the Beatles' more successful songs, often being called the greatest song of the 20th century, which purely is amazing considering it was conceived in a dream.